Because of the following special program, Mr. Merlin will not be presented this evening.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
If you like comic books, then you definitely like comic art. Visit comicartfans.com to see original comic artworks and custom drawings that people have collected and posted online. Coming soon, Comic Art Fans is hosting an in-person event called the Original Art Expo that will focus on the hobby of collecting original comic art. The Original Art Expo will be held at the Doubletree by Hilton Hotel in Orlando, Florida on January 26th through the 28th, 2024. They will have over 30 exhibitors and 60 comic artists. Spend the weekend in an intimate setting with some of the best creators in the world. Purchase or commission a piece of original comic art. Visit the Comic Art and Illustration Galleries. Attend the Saturday night auction and pizza party and hang out with your fellow comic art enthusiasts. The Original Art Expo is sure to be the world's premier visual storytelling art event, so don't miss out. Go to oa-expo.com to get your tickets today and visit comicartfans.com to see what comic art collecting is all about.
Hi, I'm Alex Ross. The two pieces are sort of a type. They're both kind of recreations of artwork that existed in the 90s. In fact, this piece here for the Avengers is in most ways a recreation or a tribute to George Perez's poster version from the mid-90s, where he did a shot that featured in it a figure of Captain America that was very similar to what I've done here, positioning of the Vision or positioning of Hawkeye, and I believe a few other elements are very similar to that piece, and it's consciously so. I was building off that inspiration, but I kind of refitted my design to fill out bigger shots of the figures so that I was making a wider composition and getting in a lot of the same characters, but still not quite as many as what George himself did, because George's thing was always to try and get in the maximum amount of content into pieces that he did.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here, always happy to welcome one of my favorite Spider-Man writers, Batman writers, DC, Marvel, his creator-owned stuff, everything he does. I'm just been a big fan ever since I've started reading him, and then now I've gotten to know him over the years. The great Paul Jenkins. Welcome back, Paul.
Hey, John. It's been how many years now we've been doing this, man?
Honestly, Paul, you were like among, I think, one of the first creators that I approached way back, and I want to say I started in 05. I think if we didn't start in 05, I think we started in 06. You were doing the Hulk video game.
Yeah, okay, about 2005,
Yeah, absolutely, man.
We've been doing it for a long time, man. This is what happens to us. Look, we're sagging a little bit, you know.
So, God, and yeah, Chem Doug says great memories of Paul's Hulk run. Absolutely, the comic as well. No question, man. No, a lot of greatest hits over the years. And, man, a couple of years ago, you were, there was a Star Trek fan film project called Axanar, Prelude to Axanar, something that people can see on YouTube. Great, 20-minute proof of concept short film. And I think we were all excited to see more from the Axanar project. And guys over the years that got involved with it, Christian Gossett and my buddy Rob Burnett, both guys were Balloon regulars and stuff, and then later yourself. And it seems to have been a bit of a troubled, a project that came with, some tough, I don't even know. I mean, tell me what's going on with, unfortunately, you're no longer with the project, and that's not the end of it, unfortunately. It seems like there's some antagonism going on against you as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of phenomenon, I think, John. It's one that speaks to a larger problem that we all have in this world now. I think what we're all seeing, especially when you see arguments about politics and stuff like that, you're really seeing the tribalization of people. You're seeing people try, you're seeing sort of certain people use that these techniques, cultism and gaslighting and all that a certain type of person can step in and absolutely trash a place, right? Now politics is rife with it, right? Because all you have to do in politics is basically say, my political opponent would like to eat babies, and then everyone, as long as you're willing to overtly lie about it, you can do whatever you like. Because a lot of people are going to come in and they're going to say, oh, well, I'm really afraid of people eating babies, I'm going to vote for you, right? And it works. And if it didn't work, they wouldn't do it. But you have to be a student of history to understand that politics has ever been thus, man. It's only ever been like that. You can go back to the ancient Assyrians to see the way that they did it. You can go back to the Romans. You can see how everybody has done politics. And it's the same story. So I'll give you an example of the Assyrian method, right? In ancient Assyria, they were really brutal people. They were super brutal, right? And what they used to do was essentially say, you've got to support us because we have the voice of God. We speak to God. And so if you don't do what we say, you're not going to basically be rewarded, and that's an old chestnut that a lot of people fall for, right? So there's our environment. And it's only ever been like that, but we've never had an internet before. We're 25 years now into the existence of the internet. And so what has happened to us as people is that we found that the internet has brought out methods of controlling people's behavior, of sending out a message, of scaring people, of doing really crazy stuff. And one of the things that we see as a phenomenon in all of this is people who insert themselves into like fandom, especially. They insert themselves as the number one fan, or the only fan that really keeps a candle for the true essence of whatever it is that they've chosen, or the most knowledgeable fan about the Hulk or something like that, right? And when they do that, if they are of a particular psychological background, the backgrounds are very similar, right? You can see the sort of a psychological makeup of someone like Jim Jones in Guyana, who persuaded a lot of people to take poison and kill themselves. And you can draw kind of a straight line towards some of the ways in which like fan groups have been and sort of like, popular culture and things like that have been just absolutely dominated by people with incredibly narcissistic tendencies or dangerous behavioral problems. Yeah. I recently listened to a podcast about it. It was a lady who ran the website for Harry Potter, and she talked about someone that latched onto her. And when that person latched onto her and she kind of rebuffed the advances of this other lady who wanted to be her best friend and be involved, she didn't think it was healthy. And when that happened, it was like single white female. This woman went off on her and absolutely ruined her life and just trashed everything that was about it, simply because she couldn't do what that this lady had done. So all she did was have a Harry Potter website, but the toxic fan turned this into like hell on earth for her. And so it's fascinating to watch it, John. This is what we're dealing with.
Wow. Yeah, it's disappointing, man. I mean, I always felt that fandom was a place that people of different stripes could come together and all appreciate something and do it in a nice, happy way. And I think, unfortunately, there have been some groups out there that have, well, as Tamara Dark says, certain comic creator recently coined the term "cancel pigs." Yeah, I was disappointed by that whole problem a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I saw that, right, and I think that what people perhaps can understand is if you don't police yourself, and if you don't stand for what is it, a man who stands for nothing falls for everything, right? And so if you don't police yourself and have your approach to these things mean something, if you don't stand up for what is right, if you don't have the intestinal fortitude to stay the course, you can be a nice guy for a couple of years and then decide that you don't want to be anymore because you think you might make some money doing something else. These are all things that we see, and it's very seductive to want to control people's emotions. And, because if you have a fan base, right, none of us who have that are trained. And I used to say this all the time, John. You go to a convention, and I'm like Mr. Happy, right? Like, come near me at a convention, and I'm first there to sign, and I'm last to leave. I have had the privilege of signing any number of books for any number of people and been like, really enjoyed it. Like it means much more to me, perhaps because I live in my basement, man. It's not glamorous. I'm typing all the time, right? It's not like I'm like living on the Riviera. And so another thing I learned early on was that fans that came in, this might be one of the biggest moments of their life. And I'm like, what, to meet me? Well, it's happened to me 2 or 3 times. I've had those profound interactions with fans where what was happening for them was, I kid you not, like a life-changing experience for them to meet me and have this interaction. But I couldn't have known it until they opened up or they told me about it or something like that, right? So what used to bug me was creators. For a while it bugged me, and then I kind of got over it. I used to get bugged a little bit by creators that essentially were kind of like rude to fans, you know, that would, I didn't like the idea that that creators would sit there and sort of sign and never look at the name of the person and charge $5, sign it, give it back to them without looking, and there's nothing there except, you know, the sort of, you know, input of money, right? But I think I began to realize, I don't like that so much, but I think I began to realize after a while that we're not trained to do this, right? And so some creators were shy, and some creators were nervous of people as well. You know, we attributed this always to fans, but it was creators as well that were really worried or struggling or not so sure. And so I learned to like forgive people if they weren't, but I would tend to kind of go over to my friends and say, hey man, give that person a minute of your time, you know? And you know, it's a challenge as we go on.
No, I understand, man. You know, people are bringing up in the chat, you know, your work on Wolverine, both the origin story and the end story that Marvel did for several of their characters. I think of things like your wonderful run with Jay Lee on Inhumans from Marvel Knights. That is, I think, one of the big, you know, totems of the Inhumans mythos and everything. So, yeah.
And especially Sentry that I did with Jay as well, because obviously people now know that, you know, there's a lot going on with that. And I think that's pretty exciting for us. And, you know, so, you know, I've had a lot of privilege to do that. I mean, I just always say to people, like, you have to understand, it's like my privilege to do that. I'm lucky, right? And I see it that way. So I'm like super happy meeting fans and doing my thing. But I don't really crave that attention very much, which is kind of odd. So I get the chance to go to like red carpet events and I don't go, or I don't go to awards ceremonies because I think they're stupid. And my mum yells at me all the time about that.
I understand. Here we go. Yeah, Spectacular Spider-Man run too. Our T-Bear watching and has a nice compliment as well. So that's nice. Thank you, Art. So fine creator himself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, geez, Paul, I really, it bums me out. And it also bums me out because the idea of Prelude to Axanar really intrigued me. Like I said, it's a great 20-minute movie, honestly. I think as a product itself, it's cool. But you know, unfortunately though, and the promise was, oh, you know, join a Kickstarter and we'll produce you know, we're gonna produce a movie. Now the rules of fan films changed, and I understand that too. And unfortunately, you know, now you can't make a full-length Star Trek movie. There are things like Star Trek Returns and Renegades and these other fan film projects that were able to do more elaborate stories. Now you can only do, you know, ultimately 20 minutes, I think is what Paramount allows, either 2 10-minute things or 1 20-minute thing. But, you know, that was 8 years ago, I think, Axanar, Prelude to Axanar, 2015. And like I said, guys like Gossett and Burnett worked on it. You worked on it briefly, and we haven't seen a movie. You know, I don't know what's going on with the project. Regardless, what I don't understand is that there is this antagonistic attack coming from the you know, the people that initially, you know, were part of the creation of Axanar.
Yeah, and I can tell you a little bit about it actually, because it's a pretty fascinating story, and I think that, you know, people can look at it as almost like somewhat of a success story in some ways, and as this like massive cautionary tale, right? And I think that, you know, what I feel needs to happen is that we need to look at this as a massive cautionary tale more than anything, right?
Yeah.
What happens when people come and take the things that we love and like weaponize them, you know, and all of that? You know, what happens when perhaps the wrong people come in and get themselves inserted into something that, you know, we've always loved? So we'll pick a thing. And I think that we all have to kind of acknowledge, maybe as we look at this, that you can pick anything. And I would sort of like, I used to think this always about message groups when the internet was really starting going. You know, we would all be on like Rec Arts Comics or Rec Arts whatever, right? And we go on news groups and we sort of chat to each other. And I had fantastic time on the Rec Arts Marvel Comics thing. It was great. I used to chat with fans. I used to be on CompuServe back in the day, back in the mid-90s, right?
Message board days, absolutely, man.
Message board days was great. And I made so many lifelong friends out of those message boards. It was fantastic, right? And so this was a good thing, I thought, right? But you just have to look at the way that some people are in it, and you go like, oh, well, yeah, I suppose given the way human psychology goes, this kind of thing can happen. So I used to have this theory, and it was when the Inhumans came out, and it really blew up, actually, that I noticed this because, you know, I'd been doing Hellblazer. People sort of liked it. They somewhat didn't, you know, but who knows, right? And so I used to think, well, you know, it's interesting to see reviews. And so I would tend to be fine with negative reviews. I really genuinely didn't mind because it's all in the eye of the beholder. But you could tell when some people were saying, yeah, I didn't really care for this. And some people were saying, like, I'm going to insert myself and make sure everyone knows this is the worst thing I've ever seen because I think I might affect Paul Jenkins and make him angry. Now, that's a different reason for making the criticism. That's not to do with whether or not you like the work. It's whether or not you think you can sort of affect somebody that you think has some kind of influence, or, you know, you have some power over somebody, which is a very strange psychological kind of thing, but it's understandable. Yeah. And so, And so what I saw, John, was, you know, I saw a lot of really poor behavior. And I found that with the Inhumans, we had loads and loads and loads of really positive stuff. And then about 3 issues went by and people weren't really talking about it very much. And I kept thinking to myself, that's interesting. They kind of mention it. The next one comes out. And what was happening is the next one would come out and people liked it and they didn't have anything to say anymore. I like this one too. And they didn't have any way to kind of say, like, this is the worst thing ever. I hate it. And no one likes it. And, you know, Paul Jenkins smells, right? And so I learned this phenomenon, which is if you go to any message board, I must think there's an equation. Go find a message board of something in popular culture. Let's talk about a new film like The Creator, and I wonder if there's a message board for that. And if you find one, 85% of the comments will be negative or antagonistic, 10% will be neutral, and 5% will be positive.
Yeah.
Because that seemed to be the formula for the way that we were evolving in our communications as a digital species, you know, and it's disappointing.
Yeah, and it's permeated every. I mean, certainly it's a big part of politics. It's a big part of news discussion, and like I said, it used to be at least we could all get together and go to a convention and just like something. But unfortunately, I think people are discovering that if you're more negative, you know, throw garbage out there, it'll bring flies. And I think that unfortunately is kind of what's happening. I mean, God, you know, in fact, probably tomorrow night I'm going to be doing my usual roundup of recent sci-fi TV and film and everything. And I'm sure we'll talk about Rebel Moon, the Zack Snyder movie. We'll talk about the new Doctor Who finally had his own first story on Christmas Day. And it was funny as we were doing the David Tennant Doctor Who's. We're all watching. It's like, yeah, it was good. Yeah, I liked it too. Okay. And then we didn't have anything else to say about it. And it's like, all right, what's the next subject and everything? And yeah, you know, I mean, and listen, hey, when it comes to some, you know, Star Wars, Star Trek, some superhero movies, unfortunately, some things that came out this year, I don't like everything. I mean, and I'll try and give a polite, but if I didn't like something, I'm happy to speak my mind. But yeah, I think some people are kind of, you know, lousy about it, and also will go even that step further of really hating on people. Here, step on subject. I'm glad you're watching, man. I know that online discourse has been reduced to if you don't like it, yell about it. If you do like it, keep quiet. Yeah, that's the weird thing, man, and that's a shame because I listen, man. Everybody's capable of writing or producing a bad story idea, but it's always within. I've always felt this way as I do Word Balloon. I'm sure the creator was like, well, it seemed like a good idea at the moment, whether it's genuinely loved or genuinely hated. Again, whether they deviate from the norm in some way, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that, so going back to the Axanar thing,
Sure.
You're talking about it's almost a question. What happens when the things that we love are hijacked by bad people? What happens, right? You, I believe, were a donor to Axanar. Yeah. I mean, you gave money, right? And so your expectation as a person, as a fan, as somebody that's like, man, it's great to see maybe some cool Star Trek happen, right? Probably you gave that on the strength of the fact maybe you saw Prelude to Axanar and you went, that was really good. I want to see if I can get more of that, right?
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with that. And that's literally kind of going like, man, that made me think about old Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. Look good, right? Liked it very much. Let's have a go at that again, right? I can't see a single thing wrong with that until you find out in whose hands that thing rests. And if it rests in the wrong hands, that's when you've got a problem, right? So Prelude to Axanar, because obviously I know Christian now pretty well, and I know Rob. I've actually known Rob for a really long time. I've known him for 20 plus years.
Oh,
and
wow.
23 years now. And we dropped out of touch and then kind of reestablished, obviously, because of what's happening. But essentially, Christian brought in his producer, Jennifer Webley. And under Christian's guidance, his creation, all of the stuff that he did, and Jennifer Webley putting it all together and making it be really amazing. Here's this thing that they made, right? They made Prelude to Axanar. They showed it to great effect, and it was fantastic. And everybody's sort of like, how did you manage to do that, right? Now, the problem is that the people that made it were not the people that were sort of essentially running it or taking credit for it. It's an age-old story, right? You got a producer that's basically doing it, and that producer is a producer in air quotes. Like they always say famously, that the requisite for being a producer in Los Angeles is to cross the state line of California, put your hand up in the air and say, I'm a producer, right? And I've met plenty of them. I've sat in so many meetings at the Beverly Hilton and some of these other places where I'm just like, none of you people are doing any of the things to make the stuff, but you're right there attached to it like limpets, and it's exhausting being around these people. So that's what happened with this. On the strength of Prelude, they went to go raise money to go make Axanar. And lo and behold, in comes $1.3 million or something, and so you'd go like, wow, right? Because I know what I do with $1.3 million. And so what do you actually do when you want to go make a thing? When you got 1.3, it's actually not a lot of money and it is a lot of money. It's both of those things, right? But if you really want to make it, the first thing that you do is you protect that money and you sort of like account for that money. You put it in a production account. You make sure you know who's doing it, who's the line producer, how's it going to be put together, how much are we going to spend here? You budget it, you do it, right? So that would be the only way in which a film can be made for that amount of money with those type of effects. But it could be done, right? They had the people lined up. They had a cast. They had all this stuff. And Christian told me, I chatted with him about it. And he's like, look, one of the first things that happened when they showed the Prelude to Axanar is that the producer came up to him, this guy, and basically went to him, yeah, I want to fire everybody. And Christian's like, we haven't even finished the premiere. We're at dinner at the premiere and he's coming up and telling me he wants to change everybody out, right? Like, what are you talking about? And it's like this delusion of grandeur, right? This idea that you connected to something. And what you could do, you could you could take the great people that you have and do a great thing with them, right? So this guy, Alec Peters, he's the producer. And so he could have taken all of these people and done something really great by letting this all happen. But instead of doing that, he made his own path for all of this. And that path wasn't a very healthy one. It wasn't one that said, let's preserve the money, let's do these things. It was a path that was dictated by his own set of psychological issues, and that path was never, ever going to work. And obviously, I've discovered that to my cost now, that the toxic and angry and broken kind of behavior that surrounds this stuff is really something that nobody could have foreseen. Because, John, I'm going to ask you a question, because we did this the other day. How much did you put into the project?
$35.
Okay. So how would you feel if your $35, I'm actually looking at some PDFs of bank accounts that were sent to us for the documentary, right? What do you think your money would go to?
I would assume production of a, Prelude to Axanar. If people don't know what Prelude to Axanar was, it's the Garth of Izar story, the captain that is in Whom Gods Would Destroy, season 3. He's a former Starfleet officer that in the original series at that point is in a mental hospital. But Captain Kirk says, when I was in the academy, Captain Garth was one of our heroes. He was the hero of Axanar. And Prelude kind of explains the lead up to this big battle between the Federation and the Klingons. We all assumed, seeing Prelude to Axanar, that we were then helping fund what eventually would be the next chapter, where we would actually see the Battle of Axanar and Captain Garth and the Federation in this early battle against the Klingons. That was our assumption of what we were putting money towards.
Sure. And so you accumulate all of that money and you got $1.3 million. And you're like, well, man, look at all these fans that are coming together to make this thing. So as I look at these bank accounts, which, Rob Burnett and I began to just kind of look at it, because I, have, like I said, I'm a halfway decent investigative reporter. And so how would you feel if I said that, your $35 went to, 4 months of his subscription to the Dollar Shave Club? Or that your money went to, disregard the shocking amount of expenses. I actually did a breakdown of how these expenses were done. How would in the first 3 months, how would you like it if $3,000 of that was spent on Warhammer toys, or that $650 was spent on comics, or $10,000 was spent on personal props, right? Which he bragged about when he bought them. I, as a person that was donating to Axanar, would say that's just not what I wanted to happen with this money, right? I don't believe there's any justification in any way whatsoever for somebody to take a load of money and then kind of like obfuscate a little bit and scream. What happened when people said, well, where's our film, or what have you done with the money? If you go to the Kickstarter, it's a bunch of yelling and ad hominem attacks and the same discredit. It's like a series of techniques that we can see in any of these people that run these toxic kind of, from character assassinations to ad hominem attacks, all that kind of stuff. Because the actual answer should be, yeah, what I did with your money is put it into making a film. And in these bank accounts that we have, what actually went to were things like, there's one in here where a big load of the money came in October of 2014, right? And there's a trip a couple of months later to Nottingham in England, right, to go to the home of Warhammer to do a Warhammer tournament and buy thousands of dollars worth of toys, in which he stayed at the Belfry, like a famous hotel there, that's not what anybody wanted to happen with this thing. And so all of these arguments that have been happening about, well, was it mismanagement, or was it that a lot of people talked about the fact that he sort of talked about making a studio and actually not using the money for Axanar, but to actually make a studio that he could monetize, right? I think both of those arguments aren't necessarily true. I think the argument is literally in the proof of looking at the bank accounts and realizing that if you spend, $600, $230, $240 a month on comics and $1,000 on your car, none of that is what anybody donated for. And that's where we run into these problems where people have learned how to monetize this toxicity. They're turning it into money. They're getting a group together and they're screaming and yelling and creating this tribalistic kind of fight. And then they're saying to their loyal fans, Okay, fund me, give me money, make it mine, give me stuff. So one of the developments that happened a couple of months ago is that CBS, were in a lawsuit with this gentleman, and they did basically a settlement agreement. When I came on board, my producer and I, we said, like, you're going to have to tell us what this is all about. You're certainly going to have to prove to us that the money's going to be in a bank account and we're able to spend it the way that we are. What's the deal with the settlement agreement? And the answer was, you can't see it because it's confidential. That's probably not the reason why we couldn't see it, because what the actual reason was that everything that we were being coerced into doing was breaking the terms of the confidential settlement agreement. So we are now being responsible for, say, paying actors that we're not allowed to pay, or spending money on this or that the production was not supposed to be doing. And we couldn't have known because we asked for that information and we weren't given it, right? If you look at all of that kind of behavior, you're like, listen, if it looks like a duck and it quacks and it waddles, it's probably a duck. It's not hard to see what was happening.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can appreciate making a company and paying yourself a salary, and then obviously what you do with that salary is one thing. Again, it's been years, and there have been there just hasn't been the next film. There have been starts and stops and things, and I know you came in as a director, right? Weren't you going to direct the thing? Again, like you said, I mean, my God, it goes back to, I guess, 2014 or whatever.
Yeah.
That's 9 years ago. Where's the film? It's kind of basic.
We ask ourselves, how does this happen? I think that's the thing that we should always do, right? How does this happen? And I think what we need to do is look in the mirror collectively and say, are we allowing this to happen? Maybe that's a good thing, right? Because, John, I suppose the way to look at this is, I've said many times about this particular individual in this particular situation, the only thing necessary for the advancement of evil is for good men to stand by and do nothing. It's something that's like famously said, And so if we don't try to end this, if we don't try to bring it to some kind of conclusion, then what do you think the actuality of this will be? It can only be one thing. It'll perpetuate and it will get worse, right? It's something that we collectively are responsible for saying we love Star Trek, or we love the Hulk, or we love Spider-Man, and we shouldn't allow one individual who's much more he has all the stamina in the world to be toxic, and he's much more abrasive, and he's very arrogant. He's really going to attack you. Those are the dangerous people that blow up some of these things that we love and enjoy, and we shouldn't allow that to happen.
Yeah, and man, especially, I mean, Star Trek going back to, at the very least, the 70s. I mean, it started in the 60s, in mid 60s, and it ended in 69. But there's always been this kind of just grassroots fandom that grew up around it and stuff. And really, hey, we all love this. Buy my sketchbook. I'm drawing Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley and William Shatner and everything. Right. And a lot of goodwill amongst Star Trek fans in particular, and in this case, where, you're making this thing. That's great. Well, we want to help. We want to see it. Sure. I mean, and again, there's really, really good fan films. Not just Star Trek, but all these different fandoms and stuff where people really, put an effort in and make something cool. And again, I think crowdfunding is a wonderful thing. I certainly take advantage of it with Patreon and everything. And it's because, hey, if you like what I do, can you help me out and help me, have the funds to continue to do it and pursue it to a level of quality and stuff. And I just think people that unfortunately are misrepresenting why they're in it. I think there's a lot of willing fans that want to help, and then something happens that we don't get the Cracker Jack prize that we were promised at the bottom of the box,
right?
And I think it's kind of lousy.
I think you can look at some other things as well, John. One of the things that we probably can bring up, I don't think it's not something that's like our favorite subject, I'm sure, which is the sort of arguing about comics right now, like what's in them and are they woke and all this other kind of stuff, right? Like, I'm sort of like, my whole life, I've been two things, right? I've been outside politics because I'm an old punk. So if you start talking politics with me, it's not going to happen. I'll point out how stupid your politician is, right? You're gonna sanctify some politician and demonize the other one. You need to wake up, man. It's a self-enrichment scam right in front of your eyes, right? So, let's point out that Paul doesn't do politics and never will, right? So the use of politics to create this tribalistic approach to whether or not we like this or that, science doesn't care if you vote Democrat or Republican, right? So if there's global warming / climate change that's caused by us, then really science will dictate it, and we should take a look at it and see what happens based on the science. But you shouldn't think there is global warming because you're Democrat and there isn't global warming because you're Republican, because that pretty much doesn't follow scientific method, right? So you can look at all of those things that have happened to us. We do that about COVID and vaccinations. We do about this, we do about that. We have this like divisive thing. The second thing about me is I've always been a unifier type person. I like to talk to everybody, right? I've lived in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is the most liberal county at Smith College, the 5 college areas where we did Ninja Turtles. It's the most liberal county in the country. And I currently live in Forsyth County, Georgia, which is the second most conservative county in the country. And if it's rated as the second most conservative county, someone's going to point out what is the most conservative county, because this place, my God, right? But what you have to understand is, like, I know people in my neighborhood, they're perfectly nice, right? They're totally Trumpy. They're perfectly nice. They wouldn't be Trumpy if there wasn't a Trump sort of thing. And I always say to them, like, it's not what your values are, your conservative values or your, like liberal values. It's what message you're listening to, by which narcissistic lunatic you're listening to, right? And so what you want to do is question who these people are that are telling you to say horrible things and do horrible things. Well, that applies to fandom, John. We've got people who come in and they say, I'm the keeper of the flame. In the particular case of this person, it's, I'm the only one that understands Star Trek. Nobody else does. Now, he famously went to Netflix and tried to sell Axanar to Netflix, and it's not his intellectual property, right? But he went to go pitch his project to Netflix. That seems like the height of arrogance when it doesn't belong to you and you're going to go pitch it anyway. I mean, I would have a problem if someone sort of turned around and said, hey, I'm going to go pitch Fairy Quest, the thing that you created with Umberto. I'm going to go pitch it and see if I can make it into a film because I want to. And my answer would be, you didn't create it, mate. Like, you didn't make it. Well, CBS's answer to that was, hey, man, you didn't make it. And so they sued him. He got hit recently with a $320,000 finding in not in the legal courts, in a sense. It wasn't a lawsuit. When he signed his agreement, the settlement agreement with CBS, he agreed to arbitration. So they brought it to arbitration because he spent the next 5 to 6, 7 years ignoring the terms of the settlement agreement. They finally brought it to arbitration, and the arbitrator found that he had violated every term of the settlement agreement. He was selling merchandise that he had no right to sell. He was using the Axanar logo, or he was paying actors. He was doing all the things that we said, oh, we're not doing anything wrong, are we? He's like, nah, it's all good, man. No problem. Well, guess what we found out? Everything we were doing was wrong. And so all of this sale and all of this merchandise that you're making money from, you can't do that, John. I don't want anyone to go make merchandise and sales off of Fairy Quest. Why should I allow that, right? I'm trying to make a living. So it doesn't matter if CBS Paramount is a big corporation. It matters whether or not you're allowed to do it because it belongs to you. And it's the height of arrogance to walk into, let's pick a thing, Harry Potter, and say, I'm the keeper of the flame of Harry Potter, and what I say is correct, and I'm the only one that sticks true to it. Come to me, give me money. I'll take your money, and I'll make Harry Potter stuff that's legit, and the other stuff's crap. Right? That is not the way that this works.
And unfortunately, there are companies out there and even people with Etsy accounts that are making on a very small scale Spider-Man T-shirts, whatever, knockoffs. I mean, God, we see at conventions. Let's not kid ourselves. And the average person walking in will see a booth with a bunch of 11 by 17 prints of name your favorite superhero, and DC and Marvel, can't knock down, or I guess really in this case, Disney and Warner's can't knock down every one of these because they, I'm sure they could have their own separate division. And I know Disney actually, to a degree, does do that. I remember one of the famous stories where innocently a children's hospital in their ward painted a Disney mural, and Disney's like, those are our characters. Sorry, can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't making money off it per se, but again, it's a copyright violation. Copyright's tough, man.
It's a tough one, John, because I started out as a third employee actually of the Ninja Turtles, right? So I was right there when it blew up. And what do you think happened to us at the beginning? Everybody was knocking off Ninja Turtles everywhere that you went, right? So Kevin and Pete had to learn what to do. Like, what do you do when everybody's stealing from you? Well, let's say that I remember this I was really young. I was like 22. And I'd go down a fairground and there would be like knockoff Ninja Turtles. And I'd be like, I don't know what to think about this. It's clearly nothing. None of the money's coming back to us. None of the money's, but what do? You couldn't police this across the world. However, when they went, there was this like famous trip over to Hong Kong where the licensing agent over there said, no, they're not very popular in Asia. Nobody likes them really. Got off the plane in Hong Kong and found that there was green everywhere. Yeah, that seems like more of a sort of, let's prosecute that because you're taking millions and millions of dollars. There are all kinds of nefarious things. People would sue us every week and say that they claimed they created the Ninja Turtles, right? And when it happened, we would simply settle with them, apparently. I mean, I wasn't part of that, but, we'd settle with them. We'd go like, it's more difficult, So it's not like this is a new phenomenon. That was before the internet, right? But you got a problem with Mark Brooks drawing a beautiful Spider-Man image for someone, Umberto, someone, like, why should you? You don't care. They're an amazing artist. They work on this anyway. They're making their living. It's not like they're violating the spirit of your copyright. They're giving someone something that they need. It probably builds your brand and keeps it relevant if people are drawing Spider-Man pictures, right? Now, if you're claiming that you can make a Spider-Man film and you can monetize it and you do all that kind of stuff, you're probably in the Hong Kong territory at that point. You're probably not allowed to do that. And that's what happened with Axanar. It wasn't, I'm making a fan film. It was that I've raised $1.5 million, right? Or whatever it was. There's all this money coming in at conventions. That's like cash coming in. That's a lot of money, John. And all you thought was going to happen was that your money would be used to buy, a sandwich at lunch for the crew or whatever it was that was being done in production. And what you find out, and I think this is the bit that really, really hit home for me when I, came into possession of my set of these bank accounts, I looked at it and I'm like, man, there's some stuff on this that is just wrong, like so wrong. There's one item, and I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say what it is because it's quite scurrilous, right? It's very scurrilous. I don't care about stuff like that. But there's one item that I saw purchased and I was furious because of it. I was like, there's no way that anybody donated their money thinking that this was going to be purchased with their money, right? And it's throughout it. There's thousands of dollars on restaurants and thousands of dollars on ATM withdrawals and stuff like that. Like this is not what we signed up for. We wanted something amazing. And that's what Christian and Jennifer Webley did. They made this amazing thing. And we thought, great, with $1.3 million, we're going to do that times 10. We didn't do anything.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Mark says something nice here. Is there a nicer, more stand-up guy in comics than Paul? I'll be donating it as the thanks to all the comics and stories and standing up to fight for what's right. Yeah, there's a GoFundMe account on Paul's behalf because Paul is being sued, and it's to call it a nuisance lawsuit. I think unfortunately really is a small way of describing. I mean, this has cost you a lot of money, Paul, and I'm sorry to hear that. And it really, that's when I knew that you had left the Axanar project. I knew there were bad feelings. I had no idea that there was this kind of.
So
go ahead.
Let me step in there.
Please.
In there. I'm going to tell you something that I think is pretty fascinating about even that, right? So this particular individual, Alec Peters, he has a very understandable technique if you just understand the psychology of, say, weaponizing stuff against somebody, or the psychology of somebody with this particular, psychological profile, right? He relies on the false equivalency of there's a dispute, right? That works in his favor. There is no dispute. There was no dispute. There's no dispute from one side. So we have a thing, and this is part of the documentary that we're making. We've done a lot of studies on psychology because I'm fascinated by it. I've been a writer for 33 years, right? So, unfortunately, it makes you an amateur psychologist, right? And in all of that time, I've really studied why people do what they do, and I've had some success by really writing about core character and story. That's like what I do, right? And so what I think, we should be aware of is how that actually works and what our biases do. The fairness doctrine makes us say there's two sides to every story, right? There must be whatever it was that Paul did and whatever it was that Alec Peters did, right? That's what we do, and it's okay, but it's actually a psychological bias. A cop will tell you there's three sides to every story. There's his version, and the truth, right?
Truth.
Which might be a little closer to the truth. But let me tell you something, right? We always go, well, there's not one side to a story, and that is not true. That's not true, right? It's very misleading, and it's a little bit naive. Answer me this question, John. How many sides are there to a drive-by shooting?
Yeah, one.
Right. And so we have to understand that the most difficult conversation I usually have with, say, my attorney or any of that kind of stuff, the most challenging conversation that I have is trying to explain who this person is before it all gets going and before it kicks off, right? It is extremely, extremely challenging to explain that maybe, just maybe, you walk into a room and you meet someone for the first time and you say, hi, nice to meet you. And that's the first lie that they tell you. Or you walk into a room and you encounter somebody that's just not a good dude, right? It happens. I've spoken to plenty of people in law enforcement. I'm actually working on a project with some people in special forces, right? These are all operators, right? And they've been all over the place, these guys, right? And their stories, they know how humanity is weaponized against itself by really, really bad people because they've seen it in action. So we think we have this predisposition. We don't think those people are real. It almost seems like, the mob, right? It seems like, the mob aren't real. Eskimos aren't real. Unicorns aren't real, and the fact is that just on occasion, there are these really, really, really difficult people. And what's fascinating about it, right, is that these really, really, really difficult people, they love to insert themselves into something where there are vulnerable people. How much more vulnerable people are you going to find than comic book fans that are a little bit nervous or sometimes, and they're sort of all talking about something they love, but they're not sure whether or not the nerds are going to inherit the earth, they're not the school bullies. They're the people that end up being your boss, mind you, right? And so here's all these people that there's a lot of awkward people. I've met plenty of people that might be on the spectrum and love comics. I've met these wonderful people that are all part of this, that they've got maybe challenges, like mental health challenges and stuff like that, but they really gravitate towards comics, video games, pop culture, Doctor Who. They love this stuff, right? And those vulnerable people are people that these nefarious people walk in and go, man, can I weaponize this? This is going to be great for me. And we have a history of seeing people do that. There's famously, I can't remember which singer it was, but there's a Hispanic singer, I think, who's the head of a fan club, came up to her front door because she was finding out she was embezzling the funds and killed her, just shot her at the front door.
Wow.
Right? I can't remember which one that was, but it was a young woman who was really, really high on it. Is in the mid to early 90s. And the person running her fan club
was that Selena?
Selena, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was Selena. And the head of a fan club was embezzling a bunch of money, was about to get found out, so walked up to her front door and shot her dead. Right?
Wow.
These people exist, and we we so don't want them to exist that we sort of go into denial. But hey, you're going to run into maybe 2 or 3 of those in your life, and I ran into one. That's all that happened. My crime here was that I met this person. And the craziest part, we know the maxim, no act of kindness goes unpunished, right? The craziest part of all of that was that I did it from the advisory committee I ran for the governor's office. And so I had been introduced to this guy in order to go and help him and welcome him to Georgia. Talk about no act of kindness goes unpunished.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah. Jesus, Paul. Yeah, I didn't realize it was your state government involvement in Georgia to help drum up business and everything, which, as you say, was done with good intentions. God, and truly, Paul, I mean, I've watched, some of your movie things that you've tried to get done, and certainly your creator-owned comics and stuff. So no, yeah, I get it. And again, coming from comics where it is this collaborative business of, well, what can we do? Your involvement with Tundra and then the Turtle Guys. And I mean, so no, I know a good portion of your professional life has been, hey, here's, it's that Mickey Rooney. Hey, let's all get together and put on a show. And do it with, and you've had good actors and bad actors that you've encountered.
Yes, that's true. That's absolutely true. I mean, we think we saw that at Tundra. We saw a lot of people that were fantastic and really amazing. Listen, how lucky do you think I was, right? That at a certain point, I think I was 23 years old. I was a director of a publishing company. I was an editor-in-chief, right? At the same time, I was an editor to Bill Sienkiewicz, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, right? Rick Veitch, Dave McKean, all these people. I used to call Alan Moore up all the time. Hello, Alan. All right. And he'd always say the same thing. Go, hello, Paul. All right. So, I was the guy that got to see like big numbers. I used to get the scripts for it. I think I've shown you this before. I've got half of it in my house. The unpublished.
Well, I was watching you talk to Rob, and you were showing those and I don't want you to, don't worry, man. Stay still. You don't have to pull out the images. Everyone should go and watch Paul's conversation with Rob Burnett.
You can't see it. You can't see it, John. So let's explain that now, right? So now that this truth starts coming out, remember, I've been 3 years of just having to take this, right? And, being a professional, a working professional, I really don't have a way in which I can say much. And I want to talk about this in a minute too, because I want people, maybe as they listen to what we're talking about, to understand how this works, right? I'm not in a position where I can get into a tit for tat with somebody who has these psychological issues, right? I can't do that because A, I have a fan base. B, I have a company and a business. I have a profile. I work professionally in the entertainment business across multiple media with very, very big corporations, right? And so the idea that I'm going to get a tit for tat with an angry fan is not part of my world. 3 years of listening to these diatribes, 3 years of it, right? And so finally, I'm like, man, I'm tapped out, right? I put hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into it. I owe so much more, right? And I'm like, this is awful, all right? I've got to stand up because I've talked to a few fellow professionals about this before, but it's sort of like never anything that galvanized. Figured, you know what? It's time to stand up to this. It's time for us to get this particular individual into the one place he doesn't want to go, which is a courtroom, because he hasn't been in one before. And there's this history of avoiding, in our lawsuit, we got nothing in discovery pretty much. Like the discovery misconduct is so crazy. So give you an example, right? If I have 167 emails between he and I, right? 167, and he provides 2 for discovery, that means there's 165 he didn't give in, right? Well, in the end, I gave 6,700 emails, and very famously in his deposition, we pointed out to him, how many emails, was it more than 100? And he sort of laughed. Of course it was. No, it wasn't. It was 52. He gave us 52 emails out of thousands. He did it in the CBS lawsuit. He's done it his entire career. And as a lifetime vexatious litigant, when he sued me, he was famously online feeling his oats and bragging that he was in 5 lawsuits at that time. John, that's not what we do in civilized society. We don't do this stuff, but you do it if you're that kind of person. And I think that it's time now for us collectively to stand up to this, which is exactly what I chose to do. I'm going to stand up and stop this from happening, right? Yes, at great personal cost, but looking at the sheer amount of victims and interviewing people for the documentary and finding out what this one individual has done to ruin so many lives, I'm like, if not now, when? If not here, where? And if not me, who's going to ever be able to do this? I've got at least a fan base. I've got people that care about me. I might have enough resources to be able to get this guy. And I'll tell you what, man, it's a challenge. It's touch and go. Now, doesn't it tell us everything? If I want to be in a courtroom and every single part of this obfuscation is to avoid being in a courtroom, we're 3 years into a case and we haven't even had a single ruling and a single motion yet because of the ongoing sort of shenanigans in discovery. So you only have to look at it, and sometimes it's a self-evident truth. If it's a duck and if it quacks and it waddles and it's got feathers, it's a duck. That seems to be what's happening.
What are you closer to a court date? Let's start with that, and then I'll ask about the documentary.
Okay, so let's talk about that, and let's talk about this. If I would say it like this. Let's say that I tell you one anecdote, right? Multiply it by 200, and that's what's actually happening. So I'll tell you one anecdote about what just happened in the court thing. We have what's called, we had a court date, which is January the 22nd, right? And we had a calendar call on December the 6th, my birthday, right? Fantastic. Well, at the end of business hours on December the 5th, his attorney and his attorneys, right, do this with him. Like, this is the thing that, they've been put on notice. Like, we know exactly what you're doing. So when we win this case, don't breathe out, man, because you're doing this with this guy. This is the Faustian pact that he makes with all of these attorneys, right? On the night before, right, his attorney shows up and says, yeah, I got a bit of a conflict tomorrow. Turns out I got a conflict. My attorney looked into it right away. He knew he had a conflict since November the 4th. For 34 days, their attorney knew they had a conflict, but they decided to say it after business hours the night before in the hopes that it would all get put back. And guess what happened? It got put back. So I'm going to tell you something that you and every person watching this and anyone who's a citizen or a resident of this country should be furious about, right? This is the kind of thing that you guys should all go out there and say, this is not the way that this should work. If I provide all of my discovery materials, and there are 6,700 emails and thousands of gigabytes of information, which has been requested of me so that I provide it and it goes into discovery for review. It's taken in and you put keywords in to look for things. So you might put in the word Axanar or Jenkins or Suntress, right? You put in these names and these things and it goes and searches them. Well, it cost me $1,200 a month to be storing that stuff, right? So for not cheating, I'm penalized $1,200 a month. And for cheating and not providing the discovery, he doesn't pay a penny.
Wow. It
got to a place where in the CBS arbitration, they gave some rulings and they ruled against him $320,000 odd of you cheated, you didn't do any of the things you're supposed to, you sold illicit merchandise, and now an arbitrator, not a judge or some lawsuit, an arbitrator that you agreed to has now found. And you know one of the things that the arbitrator found? He countersued CBS for this arbitration for the legal fees in his lawsuit against me because he said that they were responsible for him suing me. Right? So he went to them for his typical number. This is the number that he does. He came to me a few months into it and said, I want you to give me $310,000. To which my response is, for what? Right? Like, what do you think is happening? He went to them and he said he wanted north of 300 and south of 400, which is his typical number. Right? It's just a formula. And the arbitrator said in the finding, he could provide no evidence that he had spent a single penny because he didn't. That's the arbitrator's word. In other words, he hasn't spent a penny on my lawsuit, and I've spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands. This is the stuff that we should be furious about. How can it be that by not cheating, I'm penalized, and by not playing by the rules, he gets away scot-free? And it's not just this person, it's we need to go look at what's happening to us, and that's the kind of thing that I think we need to shine a light on. Yeah?
Understood.
Right.
What's the so Talk about the nature of the documentary and where you are with the documentary.
Sure. So the documentary is tentatively at the moment called Into the Wormhole. And I got to tell you, man, I would say this, I came to this as a reluctant documentarian. Never made a documentary before. But, you can look at a few people that made their first documentary like Morgan Spurlock, and it didn't work out so badly, right? So this was happening. And I thought that I was going to make a documentary about toxic fandom, right? But I was making a documentary about toxic fandom the same way, and if anyone's familiar with the Tiger King, this is something that I brought up before. When they went to go make a documentary, they were making a documentary about the mistreatment of zoo animals, right? They start making this documentary, and in the middle of it, it blows up because this dude suddenly does a murder for hire plot, and they're not making the documentary they thought they were making. They're making something completely different, right? So I thought I was making a documentary about toxic fandom, and that is not the documentary it turned out I was making. I mean, in view of like the evidence that started coming in, everybody reached out to me. Why'd they reach out to me? Why are they giving me evidence? Why are they giving me stuff that I've seen that no one else has seen? Because they trusted me, because they respected me, because they knew that I would never betray a confidence, because they knew that we were going to treat them with respect. So now that I've done all these interviews with people and I've managed to do, our documentary looks really good and the interviews are fantastic. We've done it the way you're supposed to, right? A forensic psychologist, clinical psychologist specializing in narcissism, a judge, a professor of law. We are interviewing people, not just the people who donated to Axonar or in the Axonar story, but people that can understand what's actually happening to our society. We started making it. We thought it was about that. And it took a turn, man. It took a turn that I have to tell you, this might be one of the most, when it comes out, it's going to be one of the most fascinating stories that you will ever hear. You will not believe what we began to discover as this was happening, right? Disregard the fact that the subtext, or even maybe some of the primary focus, is the weaponization of the legal and judicial system that we shouldn't tolerate, right? So how's the documentary going? I would say it might be one of the most fascinating documentaries you will ever see. And what we're really discussing right now is whether or not it's going to be 1 or 3, right? I held up 4 fingers then, but you can't see that on radio. But I held up 1 or 3. I'm like Monty Python. I can't count for 1, 2, 4.
No, I understand it. If it becomes a documentary series, I mean, thankfully there are platforms where that would play well. Okay. So I mean, obviously, I guess you're still in mid-production.
Well, another thing. So one of the things that happens with this particular individual is the constant need to discredit, right? So there's only like 2. When you've done that many things that you're not supposed to do, you don't have a lot of options, right, John? I mean, I think that's one thing that maybe we can just sort of like say, yeah, if you're struggling to sort of like, you're like, you've done all these things and you're about to get like outed for all of them, and you're being outed right now. And I think that's what's really created a big problem right now. Like I said, 3 years of dealing with this by myself, and now I've finally said something publicly and people know, and that image of it, his image is shattering and he's embarrassed and he is flipping out. So let's talk about discrediting. And I think that's because I don't mind addressing it head on. I actually think it's mildly amusing if it wasn't for the fact it's also hugely painful for me professionally, right? In the last couple of days, especially today, he has stated now overtly that I sent someone I'm Paul, right? Like, you've known me for all these years, right? So anyone that knows me would be like, yeah, sure. I sent someone to go and assault him at a convention. So that's a claim. Like, when you lose it, when you just don't know what to do with your brain, you're going to say anything to try and see if you can discredit someone. So the problem that he has is that people know me, right? And so there's not anyone going to go like, yeah, sure he did, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think is really fascinating is really the sort of the evolution of a narcissistic lie. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. It's one of the things that we've been investigating for the documentary, especially in the psychology of it. So imagine that you start with a lie and you're willing to tell one. Because I remember I did one interview on this about a year into it. And the reporter, Carlos Pedraza, asked me a question that I thought was really important. He said, what, if anything, about this has surprised you? And I said, I'm half surprised by the level of hatred and anger and vitriol, although I shouldn't be that surprised. I've like seen it. But even so, wow, like what a mass of anger and frustration. And like, it's all fear-based as well. Like, you know when someone's afraid because they're screaming, right? But the thing that truly surprised me was watching people lie and saying, like, I don't believe that. I don't want to believe that anyone is capable of just lie after lie after lie after lie. Like, I don't like calling someone a liar. I'd rather point out a lie that they told. But I sort of like since revised my position, because just occasionally I think you run into someone that is just this broken. And the way I described it was this. Imagine that this individual was on a train and the president of the United States was on it, and suddenly it was overtaken by terrorists, and he bravely fought his way through the train and killed 10 terrorists and saved the life of the president of the United States. If he was interviewed, he'd say it was 20 terrorists. And you're like, dude, 10 is enough. You don't need to embellish. You don't need to not tell the truth about it. So one of the lies he told about me very early on, and we knew that this meant something, but we couldn't understand. He said, oh, Paul did something that was completely inappropriate. He came to my girlfriend and told her to break up with me. And anyone that knew me said, that's fantastic. Like, actually quite funny, because number one, Paul is like literally the least likely person to do that. And number two, I don't care about him as girlfriend, right? So why would, what was that all about? And so we sort of laughed it off and went, okay. Well, over time, he revised that story. It was, I made an inappropriate comment to his girlfriend. Then it was, I was inappropriate with her and then behaved inappropriately. Now, as guys, we all know, I mean, as anyone, I'm supposed, but as a guy, you know what that means, right? The implication is Paul did something, touched her in the wrong way or whatever. And this all coded language that we all know what it means. Well, he's lost it in the last couple of days. So he started sending out a press release saying that I was fired from Axonar for inappropriate behavior towards women. Right? And it's like funny and it's not, because obviously I have a reputation. But the idea that it's the evolution of a lie, right? You tell a lie and then you compound it and do a thing and you manipulate it and move it. And by the time that it gets to where you need it to be, what you're actually saying is that Paul Jenkins behaved inappropriately towards, in plural, women, right? Whereas what it originally began was he told my girlfriend she should break up with me, and that didn't even happen. So look at the way that works, multiply that by 1,000. These are the people that seem to be taking over like these fan groups, and they're the people that seem to be attacking us and sort of the truth is disposable with these people. Now, being a unifier, I'm friends with all kinds of people, and I think we can look at a difficult situation that I'm sure you're not that comfortable talking about, which is like this kind of Comicsgate stuff, right?
Yeah. I'll
give you like 1 minute on how I look at this, right? What we can do if we think carefully is to see, it's almost a little bit like when people are frustrated with like people that vote for Trump or something like that, right? I look at it that way, yeah? The reason that they're frustrated has to be a reason. And it's not the reason that they're saying anymore. It's not even the reason that they've been told. This is being manipulated by other people, right? So maybe legitimately, for example, someone might look at, say, the output of Marvel and say, ugh, I used to love that. And now they turned the Hulk into a young Asian kid. My answer would be, why don't you create new characters that is a young Asian kid? I don't see the point. It seems a bit shoehorned. It goes back to that whole thing. Tell a good story and work really hard at the good storytelling, right? But when they have that opinion, it can be weaponized by someone that makes them angry about it. And then there's an angry forum. And then there's an online discourse. And then there's someone that disagrees. So everybody starts yelling. And now there's two factions and tribalism. And what happens with that tribalism? The people pulling the strings are making bank out of them when they're getting angry. And I think that's what we all need to look at. Not, do I disagree with someone about like politics, religion, comic books. Of course you disagree with someone. It's how do I disagree? And we need to learn how to disagree properly again, because we have lost it in these 25 years of the internet.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, man. And again, I discussed this with Rich Johnson a couple of weeks ago as well. And it's, as I always say about the Comicsgate thing, they have their platform. They're making their own comics. So they are satisfying what they claim to be the problem with DC and Marvel. Mm-hmm. So and again, if they want to change DC and Marvel, well, sorry, these are companies that disagree and aren't going to change for their specific benefit. The other argument that I heard in my chat with Rich, or during my interview with Rich in the chat, it's, well, why can't we get people to like what we like? And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. All I can tell you is you got a segment of the audience that does. It is different from politics in that you can achieve what you want, at least as far as, well, support my comics. Well, they're getting the support. Do they need to come on Word Balloon to do it? No, because I don't agree and don't want to give them the platform. Maybe in as much the same way that Disney and Warner's isn't going to cater to what they want either, and just do books that they want to do. But my thing is, you're getting your message out there and you're reaching your audience. You don't need me. You don't need my help.
I'll give you another argument, right? I've been there and helped change Marvel. I was there, right? I was right there at the beginning. I stayed there through it and helped effect change at Marvel. Do you know what the best change at Marvel and DC would be? Great storytelling where you trust the creators and they make amazing stories.
Amen.
Right? That's the change. Don't worry about all of this stuff. Like, if you don't agree because you don't like the way that Hulk is being done, that's fine, because this too shall pass, or, you hope that you like the stories better later or something like that.
Yeah.
To sort of like find the boogeyman and say, well, it's this person's like politics that did it, or they're really woke, or they're really conservative. Or listen, we should all be able to work out how to disagree. So if people who aren't like sort of full on antagonistic are thinking, yeah, I really don't like the output of Marvel or DC, they are entitled to that opinion, in my opinion, right? They are entitled to go, I don't really like the way these stories are going. I think that we've sort of hit a point where we're shoehorning in. Now, because I don't do politics, maybe this is a little bit abrasive or something, I don't know, right? But I just like people. And one of the things that always used to kind of make me laugh was that people would come up to me and say, you're really good at writing women, right? And I'd say, well, that's probably because they're 50% of the world's population. What are you talking about? I'm really good at writing women. Like, I'm hopefully halfway decent at writing people. I remember when I wrote the character Sally Floyd for Marvel, for Generation M and for Civil War.
Yeah, Civil War. Yeah, sure.
A lot of people were really pissed off because she was really liberal. And they were like, they ascribed her politics to me.
I remember.
They would yell at me like, you're a crazy liberal guy. And I'd be like, no, I'm a halfway decent writer, I think, because you are upset at the way that she conducts herself. And there were moments in my stories, I always used to do this with Sally Floyd, where she would have an adversary who might be more conservative and get her ass handed to her by the logic of that person, because they were actually correct. I wrote a character one time that was very much like a John McCain character. And when she was yelling at him and going at him, he pointed out to her that he'd not only served his country, but he'd been tortured and learned some things in his time in the military, and kind of handed her ass in the argument. And I'm waiting for the very people that complained to me about like her being too left wing to say, you know what, that was really well done. Nothing, because the minds have been made up at that point.
Absolutely.
So we need to do this differently, right? I know loads of people that are right of center, and I'm not going to forsake my friendship with any of those people because someone tells me I'm not allowed to because they're left of center. And I'm not going to do the other way around either, guys. So if you're right of center and you want me to not like someone that I love, right? I'm so close to really, really great people who are on all kinds of the political spectrum.
Sure.
And those of us with half a brain just say, politics, stop it. Okay.
Well, you want to get along with people, and good Lord, as we all have people in our families that likely disagree with us to some level of
Yes.
politics. And truly, my eldest cousin is like an older brother to me, and we disagree with politics, and we are able to have reasonable discussions where it's like,
Right.
I just want to understand where you're coming from. I don't think you're evil, and I may disagree with who you vote for or whatever, but I just want to understand. I'm so glad you brought up Sally Floyd, because what was it that she said to Captain America? I remember that being the big rub.
That was a big thing. Yeah.
And was like basically that he was so old that he was kind of out of touch with what was happening today. Like, do you know what a website is?
I do remember it. I do remember it, right? It was actually something that was like, we actually did. Oh my God. One of my favorite people in the world and one of my favorite cartoonists. If you guys have never seen his work, Chris Moreno, right? Chris Moreno and I.
Oh, I love Chris. Chris is a great guy. Absolutely. I haven't seen him forever, but yeah, I love Chris.
Fantastic artist. He works, doing Spider-Man now and has been for years. He's amazing.
Does a lot of animation stuff too.
He's an art director, and he's really good, right? So Chris and I did a Sally Floyd parody where we did the 10 worst moments of Sally Floyd's career. The 10 worst things she ever did. And there's one of them where she's like literally standing at Captain America's grave and she's yelling at Captain America, right? So let me tell you the story. Let me tell you what happened with Sally. Yeah. So she's a very left-wing character, and she works for this left-wing newspaper, and she's trying to uncover the truth. And now here comes the Civil War.
Right.
And there's these factions. Now, when we started doing it, Marvel began to see that there was a problem. And the problem was that that people on the right of the political spectrum were beginning to identify and support those in favor of registration of superheroes. This is a fiction story, mind you. And people left the center didn't like it and were going to take the opposite view of Captain America, who didn't want to register anybody, right? And I'm sitting there like, what? And so Marvel said, you're going to have to be even-handed about this because this is getting out of control. My response was, okay, look, I can't just write this vanilla story where everybody's like right in the middle. What I'll do is I will make this story with Sally. And so she was very left, and I did the John McCain scene. Remember I told you, so she kind of had this interaction.
Sure.
And she had become convinced that Iron Man, who ran the registration thing, was just bad guy. She does this investigative report, and she starts seeing money funneled into bad places. And she's like, hang on a minute, you're moving money around. This is all about money. Typical Republicans, you stupid right-wingers, right? She's like on a warpath, right? And in the story, and so now, of course, I've got people yelling at me like, you don't like, like you're mad at Republicans, right? And so what happens near the end, spoiler alert, sorry, anyone listening is going to have to do spoilers now. What happens at the end of that story is that she finds out that Iron Man has been funneling money for people's pensions so that when they register, they can be protected and their families can be protected. She finds out that he's taken the rap, right? And publicly is going to take like all the blame for what's happened. And he's done it as an act of heroism. And she walks in to see him and confront him and goes, I get what you did. And I was wrong and you were right. And I understand what you did. Right. And so she explains what she's learned. And then she says, I seem to remember she said, like, I can't tell anyone about this, but I know what you did. And you're a hero. And she leaves and he breaks down crying because she's found out that he is a hero and he's not trying to hurt anybody.
Sure.
And then when she goes to Captain America, she kind of says to him, look, I understand. Because remember, she'd been supportive of him and doing the left-wing thing the whole time. She says, I understand what you think you want, but you're talking about like Joe Duggan hitting a baseball for the Brooklyn Dodgers, right? You've got to remember that America is not just apple pie and whatever. And so it's funny to me that I just chose to use one, I mean, you think of the time, it's probably that was written, 2006, 2007. I was getting her to say crappy things about America. Like America's also like way too many lawyers, and it's MySpace, right? And stuff like, she was trying to say crappy things that it is.
That's what it was with
MySpace.
Cap. Do you know what MySpace was, Cap? Exactly.
They lost their minds, right? Because they're like, it's not MySpace, it's Facebook. Everybody knows you're out of touch now because you said, like, oh, for Pete's sake. So this whole argument, and people were so mad at me because she, a fictional character, yelled kind of at another fictional character, says, I can't support you anymore. I'm kind of annoyed with you for being like this. So I was as even-handed as you could be. Never heard a single word from the people that were complaining that she'd attacked Captain America, Iron Man, when she ends up like being supportive of him. I was waiting for them to go, well done, Paul Jenkins. You're a brilliant writer. You had us fooled the whole time. They didn't do anything. So in the end, everybody hated me, which is fantastic.
Hilarious. Oh, Paul, that is honestly, as soon as you said Sally Floyd, I'm like, Sally Floyd, of course. And again, it shows you how meaningless these diatribes are. Yep. Because that was 16 years ago, at least. And yeah, it's like, oh, man, what? Who? Sally Floyd? I mean, really go to a 20-something now who has no idea what we're talking about and everything. Yeah. Well, I also remember regarding the superhero accords, all these fans are demanding, we want a list. We want to see that document. Yeah. And Marvel's like, and you were likely in those meetings, and it's like, no, your imagination will fill in whatever you want, and it's a better experience than what we could give you. And also, we don't want to be hung on an errant word or phrase or position that, would screw things up. So it was left. I mean, at least that was my perception, Paul. Tell me what was happening inside.
Yeah, that was happening, right? We were trying to work. What are we going to do here? These people, everyone's going nuts about politics, and we're trying to tell a bloody story. This is nuts, right?
Oh, but it was in the context of 616. It was a political 616 story where one group is like, "Hey, we should register," and the other group is like, "No, that's it." And it was great to have Iron Man and Captain America on these different sides. I love the movie, but it really did generalized and vanillaed the argument that was much more nuanced in the comics, but also as like, no, you're not going to hang us on a special phrase. So yeah, tell me what was going on.
Well, what was happening was that so I had an interesting thing, that like I did not come up with the concept for Civil War.
Yes, I understand.
That was Mark pitching it and fine, but Mark was not very well at the time. He was really unwell.
Was that his colitis when he had colitis and everything?
Yeah. And it first started happening to him. And so what happened was that I ended up writing issue 11 of Civil War before he wrote issue 2. So what happened in the story was I'd basically already written it all. And so that's not that well known, but basically I'd written out all this stuff and the whole thing had been laid out now. We had all this stuff. And Ramon Bucks is really, really really good at what he does, and he's very, very prolific. He's my favorite to this day, my favorite artist to work with. I love everyone. Bucky. I don't mean it. I didn't mean it about Ramon, but fantastic artist and so brilliant at what he does. And so we had done 11 issues of that thing before Civil War 2 came out, and that story was a lot of what we had made. And so that was the big bombastic one, was Civil War, but Civil War Frontlines was really the on the street story of what really was happening down here and everything that was happening. Remember that we did these oversized issues. So we did the whole Penance creation, right? Turning Speedball into Penance.
Speedball became Penance, yes.
And this stuff, it's an interesting one. This is where I upset comic book fans because I might have told you this before, but for the sake of this audience, we'll do it again. I'm at Joe Quesada's house in New York, and we're going to have a beer with Garth Ennis, right? So all the bad stories start there, right? And we're like, Joe being Joe's like, we should get a cab. I'm like, Joe, you're walking with a British person. There is no way that we're not walking 6 blocks, right? Right? So Joe goes, okay. So we start walking, and Joe says, this is such a me, right? Because everyone at this point has just had it beaten into them. Paul doesn't know that much about comic books, right? I just don't know the history of them all. So he goes to me, hey, the things are going really well. And I love what's happening with Sentry and Inhumans and all this stuff. And we got Civil War, and I know you're on the project now. So he says to me, "Is there anything you can do with Speedball?" And I said, "Yeah, of course there is." "Who is he?" Because I didn't know who he was.
I didn't know who he was before.
I didn't know who Speedball was. And so Joe goes to me, "Oh, he's this guy, he's got these bubbles and all this." And he said, "We got a problem with Speedball. Every time we do a Speedball series, it doesn't sell and we can't sell it out. So then people yell at us because we cancel it. And then we say, if you wanted Speedball, vote with your dollars." And then we finally get it back and then they don't want it again. So I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And so that story of Penance and the creation of Penance and all of the complexity therein, I created in 6 blocks of Walk In with Joe Quesada. I said actually after a block, I went, "I think I've got a story for you." And so I tell him this thing. I said, "Well, you got all these powers, and the big thing that I see with powers is that they don't really mean anything unless you've got some reason for them to mean something, right? Why is the Hulk power interesting? Because it's his weakness. It's his strength and his weakness at the same time. Yeah. Why is Xavier's power interesting? Because it liberates him from the fact he's stuck in a chair. And all of these, so they're very, very Marvel ideas, right? And what's interesting about the Sentry, he is his own worst enemy. So he has a mental health issue. Yeah.
Yes.
Spoiler alert. Also, Jesus dies at the end of the Bible. Jesus dies at the end of the Bible. Sorry, everyone. Right. So, right. So I go, "Oh yeah, well, if he's got these overpowered things or these bubbles and no one can really define it, why don't we make that the source of his problem, right?" So he has this terrible event. It happens in Civil War. He blows up a bunch of kids. He can never forgive himself, and he clearly has PTSD, right? And he gets these obsessive compulsive things that start happening to him. He has a mental breakdown, right? In that, his powers don't quite function the way they did. And it turns out that the only way to activate his powers is if he's in pain. And since he wants to cause himself pain, he creates a suit of armor that has spikes in it. And when he gets hit, the pain is so intense that it activates his power. It's this like act of self-flagellation. What you should know is that there are 616 spikes, right? Because it's the 616 and there are 616 victims, right?
I didn't know there were 616 victims.
There were 612, and he had killed 4 more people accidentally. So I made it 616. So he had all of these. So what was the point of that suit? It wasn't even for him to activate his powers. It was so that he could put it on Explodo, whatever his name was. What's his name?
I don't remember.
The villain in Civil War.
Oh, yeah, the villain. Yeah. I don't. I don't. This is my kryptonite is a lot of deep Marvel knowledge. I have to confess.
Well, what's his name? Like, I called him Explodo because I can't remember his name, but he's the guy that blew everyone up, right? Someone in the comments, please tell us who was the villain in
the New Mutants were attacking this villain, and that's when the incident happened. And obviously, again, yeah. So there we go. Thank you, Chauncey. Nitro, apparently.
Nitro, yeah, Explodo. I do like Explodo. It's a little bit better than Nitro, to be quite honest. But
thanks, everybody.
I'm terrible at this, right? So anyway, Nitro, he goes and he finds Nitro, and then he puts the suit on him. This is really dark. Sorry, trigger alert. He puts the suit on him, and then he says, I've got so much time before I get you home. I'm going to make you wish you die 616 times. And every time he tries to blow himself up inside the suit to end his own life, the suit channels the pain back to him, and it's built for that guy to punish him. That was dark stuff. And that was when Marvel used to let me do crazy stuff like that. This thing up here, right there, is it's a Prism Award. It's underneath the Eisner. This thing is a government-sponsored Prism Award, and it was given to me by the government for an accurate portrayal of mental health issues, which is one of the ones I'm actually proud of. And that was great. For Penance.
Wow, that's amazing, man. No, I remember a lot of the broad strokes and everything, and certainly the transition from Speedball to Penance. Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, Jesus.
This is how these things are done. Well, I'm on the way to the pub, and I've only got 5 blocks. Running out of time.
Peter Beiser, absolutely correct. Pre-Disney Marvel was a different Marvel. It certainly was, man.
Yes, it was.
Yes, it did. I mean, Priest and I were talking on Friday about how it's such a little thing, and it really doesn't bother me. But again, it's, Wolverine can't smoke a cigar anymore. And it's like,
What?
all right, I understand. I get it. Again, the corporations now have different agendas, and it is their right. They own the characters. And if they want to homogenize them and PG-13 them in certain ways, that is their prerogative. And we do understand why, because it's more important for them to sell the T-shirts and all the licensing stuff than the actual comics. Thank God we still have the comics where we can explore these things. Just Priest was lamenting that the stuff that current writers can do with C-level characters, like Tom King with Mr. Miracle or the Human Target, and you tell some really complex stuff. Priest is just like, it's a shame that we can't do that with Batman and Superman to that level. Yeah. And it's like, again, it's like these, but that's whose picture is on the birthday cakes and the bed sheets and all the other licensing things, because that's the real money makers along with TV and film. So
and I think the other thing is this, that it's almost like we're going around in a circle in some ways. Like this is that belongs to Marvel and Disney. They can do whatever they want to with it, right? Yeah. It's always going to be their choice, and if they don't want to do a story, my concern, if I were to express one, would be this. I used to be the single issue guy, and I will always be the single issue guy if people would let me. And I know for a fact that people would go, that story doesn't really mean anything in the whole. And I'm like, bullshit. Those stories I sign even to this day. I'll have people come up to me with single issues that have been read so many times, and they'll come up with it in both hands and give it to me because it is something that they just love. And it'll be like we did one, I think, I see this all the time, right? One in Spider-Man where he goes and he fights the Vulture, and it's a comedy issue. It's called Snow Day. And he gets made a woolen suit, and he doesn't realize that the snow's really going to stick to it, and it sucks, right? So he's having this really horrible day, and he lands near some kids, and he slips over because there's so much ice. And then he stands up and he says, "Stay in school, kids," and they all pelt him with snowballs. And so the best part of that thing was that at one point, the Vulture kind of gets annoyed with him, and he says, "Well, meet me where we first fought, and we will take this to its final conclusion." So Spider-Man goes, "Oh yeah, okay, right." And so he's at 5 o'clock. He shows up at like the Empire State Building, and about like 6 o'clock, the Vulture comes flying over. He says, "This is not where we met. We met at the Brooklyn Bridge." He's like, "Oh shit, sorry about that." you forgot, right? And we used to do like cute little things like that. We had the silent issue with where Spider-Man fights a gang of mimes. We had an issue about baseball that everyone loves. We have an issue about a little kid that collects a Spider-Man baseball card. We had all these single issues, right? And to this day, people come up and go, "Hey, and then I love those stories." Now, when we went to do Spectacular, they went, "It has to be 5 issues," and we went, "Well, okay." And I did a lot of 5 issues, and we did the Venom story, we did Dr. Octopus, we did. This is quite funny. We did, right. Yeah. But when I look back at all of those things, I always think of this one that has consequence. I did a 4-issue series with Umberto right at the end of my Peter Parker run, which is why he and I got Spectacular. And it was because it was about him and the Green Goblin finally facing off, and having that reckoning, and having them both understand that they are the same person, but for a different fork, And I miss that, John. I miss that because we don't seem to want to do that. My crusade is not for what kind of, who's doing what, and is it, is it a woke thing, or is it like a multiracial character, or fine, whatever. My stuff isn't about that, right? I miss single issue stories because they were so cool and people always remember them. I see someone in the chat right there just brought up Mindworm, right?
Yeah, ChemDog right here.
Yeah, I wrote a single issue with him and Mindworm, and all we did was basically work out that Mindworm was beginning to fall apart mentally. And so he was a homeless person, and he was living out on the streets, and his psychic residue was actually affecting the neighborhood, and it was really messing stuff up. And what Spider-Man kind of came back to was, I can't do anything for him. Like I can't. I know he's homeless and he's struggling, and I can't solve the issue of homelessness. And it's sad I can't solve his mental health issue. That's a realization. That's a really powerful single issue story. Just one issue, one and done. That's my complaint about the way that we do comics now. Where are the single issues? Why can't we do those again? Because if you want trade paperbacks, let me write 5 single issues and collect them in a trade paperback, please.
Well, and I mean, you did. I remember your Captain America miniseries. Where,
Theater of War, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And luckily, I guess Lansing and Kelly right now with Guardian, their run on Guardians, they're doing single issues. Every now and then, Slott still does a single issue. Yeah. Again, going back to early 2000s Marvel, I love the Tangle Web series.
Yeah,
and I always tell Greg Rucka, one of my favorite stories he did was Severance Package.
Kingpin.
Exactly.
Oh my God, that's a beautiful story. I've told Rucka that same thing, because that is by far one of my favorite stories I've ever seen in this medium. That story is great.
Joe Casey with Superman did What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way.
Right.
And that was a great one shot of Superman and stuff. No, you're right, man. There's a power to a really solid 20-page, give or take, story like that, where you really can show some impact. And that's when you get inside of a character's head and can really, like, tell something beyond the fist fight and the elaborate scheme,
But more importantly than that, John, I think, is that I've said this for my entire career. I want to be able to take someone in the comic book store and point them at the wall and let them go pick up a comic and come back and go, well, great, right? I read this comic and it was a story about Mindworm, or it was a story about the Kingpin or something, and I got it, right? And what really happens is they're going to go to the wall and pick up part 7 of 13 of a crossover and go, I don't want to read another comic.
Well, because, you don't know where you are. Absolutely, man. Eisner, that was the beauty of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Eisner would tell these like weekly little, stories about a character in Spirit's Central City and everything. And it was, here's a tale. And you're absolutely right, man. That was the beauty of the comic.
Yeah. And I miss it, and so I'll be an advocate for not really like hey, is this woke, or is this like fitting into this part of the political spectrum? I've only got one thing that I advocate for, which is, can we please tell good stories that have consequence? My God, it's not hard. We seem to apparently want to make it hard. Come on.
Clay has an interesting question. He loved Deathmatch. Was that just to explore the tournament genre?
Yeah, actually. And it was pretty interesting because it came out like when Hunger Games was going and all that, and they thought they wanted a story like it, right? But, you have these moments in your career and you don't really realize only hindsight tells you, or you learn something as you're working on a book and go, wow, right? That book, if I were to say what is the most underrated book of your career, I would say that book. Like, because it came out from
Boom, right?
Boom, right?
I remember we talked about it. Yeah.
And there were like 3 volumes of 4 issues each, or something like that, or 2 volumes of 6 issues, something like that. 12 issues, and it was a story that I didn't like the title, Deathmatch. It was their title. We started it that way. But I remember calling my editor because I realized something with issue 10 that I could do. And I said, oh my God, what if we did this? And they went, wow, that's really good. And so I go, great. And then I got to issue 11. I was like, you know what? I just realized something. I call them up. I'm like, I'm a bloody genius. I've got to tell you this thing. And they like, you are a genius. That's a really good idea. So I do issue 11. Now I've only got 1 to go and I think I know what it's going to be. And I go, oh my God, my own head is exploding. What if we did this? I call them up and they're like, you're not just a genius, you're a mega genius. We never seen anything like, you know what I mean? It was like, this book was not what I thought it was going to be. Not even close. Right near the end of it, we turned it into something that I was like so proud of. And it was really quite clever. And it came out and it was there. So, the amount of people that see it, that are Boom fans, see it. And if you were to ever ask me which book would I point you to and say, that's underrated, it would be Deathmatch, because the title really kind of put people off as well,
Sure. Do you Does Boom still own it, or could you reclaim it and put it out again?
We have an agreement. I'll have to remember what that agreement was, but it was almost like it was sort of like their book, but mine as well, like the sort of collaborative, like co-ownership type of thing of that project, right? But man, that thing was clever. It's a really clever
I understand, man. Well, that's like Mark Waid and Barry Kitson did Empire. And you know, it wasn't a DC or a Marvel story, but it really was about this like interesting kind of Dr. Doom sort of villain, and it had a very Claudius Roman family feel to it, and it became this other thing. And I haven't asked Mark forever about it, and I should. And I barely know Barry. I only met Barry once. I still haven't had him on Word Balloon, but another great guy. And that's the great thing, man. You guys thankfully do your own things and will tell these really cool stories that, Future Quest is another great example of that, with you and Umberto and everything. I mean, I'm glad. What's coming up for you? Are there things coming up for you comic wise? I know you got your plate's full between little litigation and this documentary.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on this bloody lawsuit and the documentary, but yes. So you'd be doing sort of an exclusive if I tell you who I'm working with right now. You would be. Well,
if it's not ready for prime time,
I can't do it because I always know that the public want to be able to do it themselves.
Sure, of course.
But I suppose I would say that I am in a place where I'm going back to a place that people have been quite fond of me. So we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, I just started doing this with them again. So, I want to get some stuff going and all that. At the same time, as you know, like I'm one of the annoying people who's one of the few advocates for, say, like NFT storytelling and Web3, right? So everyone rolls their eyes and goes, oh, my God. And they should, because of what these idiots did with NFTs and Web3. But that doesn't mean to say that it's actually not a fundamentally fantastic technology, which it really is. And I tell stories across all media. I speak at futurism conventions, and I care very deeply about using new technologies to tell stories, right? So I'm working on a project with a company called Oniforce that works in Web3. And these guys are fantastic. They're the good guys that survived the madness or are desperately surviving it, right? It's really cool. It's like an anime style kind of world. It's got its own thing, and they're building it. And what people need to understand about like Web3 and NFTs is they are, don't look at them as a genre, look at them as a technology, right? What can you do with an NFT? You can see the provenance of a prop. If you own a prop and it's got an NFT attached to it, you'll always have it attached to it. It'll show where it goes. You can use an NFT to transport goods from one place to another. And by the time you get to the end of it, if it's lost weight, it means that it has been stolen from or something. NFTs are just a technology. But within Web3, you can really use things like, not cryptocurrencies, but like the blockchain to give ownership and provenance to people in storytelling, to allow them to have digital assets that mutate. So you can sell them a digital comic book. This is one thing that I'm really highly interested in. Telling a story that's like a time travel story, where I give you the digital comic book and you read something on page 20. And then when you turn back to page 2, because the time stream has changed or something, you turn back to page 2 and page 2 is different now.
Interesting.
We can do that with NFTs and new technologies in storytelling. We just haven't done it yet. And so NFTs exploded and went sort of nutty, and everybody lost their shirts on them. And you know what? It's a cautionary tale. Don't be greedy. Nothing happens for free. Like, you don't get free money because you woke up and bought NFTs. And that's what they sold you, and they lied, and you fell for it. So everybody should sort of
it's going to take rebranding, Paul.
And it's rebranding, right? So I've already told them, don't say
NFT. Like the NFT unfortunately has worn out its welcome as far as its label. But I understand, because in my early discussions about NFT with various tech people was, well, what if you have this toy and you could play with it digitally in a way that other digital products weren't capable of doing? And I'll screw it up and probably not correctly define what was explained to me, but I'm like, okay, that's interesting. As you just pointed out, that is yet to happen with the existing NFTs. No, we get Trump as a cowboy, a baseball card. Gee, thanks. Or I'll even shit on Star Trek. That was my favorite thing. I wasn't able to go, but I guess they had a convention in Chicago, and Tawny Newsome and Jack Quaid are like, hey, guess what? Star Trek's in the NFT business. And they were roundly booed. Good. And it was awesome. And their faces like, what do we do? What do we say? We're so sorry. And it's like, hey, man, you were just reading copy that Paramount gave you to read. But bad news, kids. Everybody hates NFTs because of that label.
And all it stands for is non-fungible token. It's actually just a technology. It's not a thing. It's not a genre, right?
No.
But they turned it into a genre, and then they sold people glorified JPEGs. So
yes.
I am lucky because I, in my life, have spoken at quite a lot of futurism conventions about the future of storytelling. And so I've learned a lot of things about new technologies and emerging technologies. It's part of what I chaired the Governor's Advisory Committee on here in Georgia, right? Was the emergence of new technologies and digital storytelling and all that stuff. So I'm lucky that I not only do I understand it, but I actually are quite good at predicting what things that will happen. That's why people want me to go talk about it, right? And so when you're looking at the future of story, you're really, my conclusion to my lecture was always the same thing, John. You know what the future of story is? The same as the past of story. Relax, right? It's just about moving people's emotions. Chill out. But what was really interesting about working in the NFT space and Web3 specifically was the potential that it had. So I was right all along. I said it from the very beginning, and I constantly said it to people. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? You're selling glorified JPEGs. You know what an NFT actually is? It's a key to a bunch of other stuff. So imagine that it was a key that you could digitally plug in, and because you had the ownership and you plugged your key in, it would open up a story over here and a video game over there, and then this would happen. And guess what? That story changed, like I explained about. And then all of a sudden, this came out of it, and now suddenly you've got two of them. You could do all of those things with NFTs. It's like saying, when we're talking to each other on the internet, it's supposed to be the art of communication, and everybody needs to sharpen their pencil, for God's sake. This is the information superhighway, and we are jumping around on a bunch of pogo sticks going down the internet. What is wrong with us? We could have done this, John, but we didn't do it, and now it's got a bad rap. And it's like the technology still sits there it's going to happen because
it's just a label. It's just the correct label away, Paul.
It's just a label. It's like saying back in the mid to late 90s, they went .coms, and everybody's like, "What a .com? That sounds fantastic." Well, you and I are talking on a .com. .com's just a thing, man.
I'm hip. I'm so hip. Absolutely. Here, a nice comment from Pumpkin Time. I read The Century with Jay Lee, the one-shots, what a ride. The tone and the way you moved the titular Marvel icons was so fresh, even in 2023. By the way, my brother loves the Darkness game you wrote as well. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Good.
We're going through the greatest hits of Paul Jenkins, absolutely.
So. I loved doing the Darkness. I always loved the character. I was lucky enough to where they gave him to me, and they were like, me and Dale Keown, right?
Yeah.
And it had really struggled up to that point. They had done, I remember reading some of the issues and sort of going like, well, you haven't sort of said why, like there's no consequence here at the moment. And I believe in our first issue, we did something that really made him understand. And we took it, when you write a story, you got to work out the why, right? And I was like, he's an orphan. He's an orphan in the story. He's like, literally, they talk about being an orphan, and no one's ever written the fact that he's got the mob and that's his family. So for better or worse, he has these family values that he craves because he's never had a family. And so he's loyal to the old ways of the mob, and he's facing up against people that are doing these new things that are really bad for the mob. He just wants to keep his family intact. And once we took that take, John, that's when the Darkness began to mean something. So it's not hard. This stuff is not hard. We just make it hard,
No, but again, every character is waiting to be great with the right writers and the right story.
Yeah, I agree.
Basic. I think, Pete Beiser, a little praise for Dale Keown. He's an overlooked master. Yeah. And I would certainly say that about his art as well. But no, man, I mean, it's truly, especially now that we're at the end of the year, the failures of the various movies, it all comes down to story.
Yep.
It all comes down to story, and it always will. So we need people like you do that again can see a property and say, no, let's do it this way. As I said about Tom King I'm a sucker for any human target story. I have Chris Chance. I just love the concept, and his Mr. Miracle, and even Danger Street that he just wrapped up. These are great ideas, and they're great stories. I mean,
have we talked about this before? I don't know if we talked about this, John, but people have speculated because of the Century, right? So a lot of people are really into the Century, and everybody pretty much knows what's happening at this point with the Century, right? And that's up to them to sort of like give the specifics of it, I'm sure, right? But people have speculated for years about like, well, the Century, where did he come from and all that? And I'm like, look, it's not that hard, right? So I'm going to tell you again, or everyone again, where the Century came from, right? And then we'll know, and then people will contradict it and make up their own version of where the Century came from anyway. So here's where it came from. I was working for DC, and I wanted to write more than I wanted to basically create comics, right? And I had been working for Tundra, and I was really interested in trying to do some stuff with DC beyond anything that I was going to get to do when I started out, right? I met with Karen Berger, and I said, I've got this idea, and it was the Century. It was a pitch for the Century. It was a superhero, right, that may or may not have been a superhero. But do you know where it came from? Because I pitched her that same story for the Hour Man, which I loved. And I was like, listen, if you took a pill that made you a superhero for an hour, you would be an addict immediately. You would be addicted to that pill because you're addicted to superheroes, right? I bet I lost you. Looks like we froze, John. We back?
Sorry, hang on. Keep going. Keep going, buddy.
Okay.
Keep going. No, keep going.
Like,
you're cool. Keep going.
We froze. Okay, we'll go back again. Okay, so I went to Karen and I pitched her a story for Hour Man because I was like, look at this. This is a guy who has a pill that turns him into a superhero for an hour. It is so brilliant to tell that story about addiction. I would be so addicted to that pill, right? I want to tell that story. And she said, we don't do anything in Vertigo that deals with superheroes. I said, oh man, that's a shame. And she said, yeah, honestly, if Alan pitched us Watchmen, I probably wouldn't do it at Vertigo. Sorry. It's just, that's not what we do. She said, come up with a different story. And I was like, I love the idea of someone who's like addicted to their power or may not be addicted to it. What is superheroism? And so I came up with that whole concept for the Century, and they rejected it for years. They were like, no, thanks. We don't want to do it. We're not interested. You're not a big enough writer. And then Jay and I won an Eisner with the Inhumans, and they said, what do you want to do? X-Men, Avengers, Spectacular Spider-Man. And Jay and I went, we want to do the Century. And they're like, oh, not that stupid thing. And the rest,
it was yeah, dude, I'm telling you, that was one of the great hoaxes. Let's use the imaginary tale word of the Silver Age, but no, it really the whole setup of the Century was fantastic, and I think it delivered. And also, it's got to be a good compliment, Paul. And I don't know, I won't put you on the spot, but it really, that I liked the way that Brian Bendis used the Century in Dark Avengers, and Norman, I mean, again, because it really gave Norman Osborn this opportunity to appear normal and really go to the Century and go, I know what you're going through. I have the same demon inside me. Yeah. I have been able to conquer it. I will help you conquer this. And it's like, wow, okay, now that's an interesting story. Now, and also, as I've told you, just the different reactions when you were writing the Century, like his relationship with the Hulk. And it really was this that's one
really, of my favorite things that we did.
Yeah, it was touching, man. It was really touching where he really got to the Hulk on a very basic level, and the Hulk really, innately just liked him.
Yeah, loved him.
So
we did this thing with the Century that was really cool. That's one of my favorite bits. First of all, Bill Sienkiewicz hadn't been doing comics for a while. And I called him up because I'd known him since I was his editor on Big Numbers, right? And he didn't really want to do comics. And I said, Bill, will you do a comic with me? Because I got this thing, The Century, and he's like, I don't really want to do it. And he said, the only way I can like almost see myself doing comics again, he's like, this is really stupid question, but can you do them in 2-panel pages? I said, yes, I can. What's the question? Right? Because he wanted to do bigger pieces. And I said, I can tell that story. We can absolutely do that. Let's do that. Right? He wanted pages that looked a certain way. And I was like, let's do that then. Right, Bill? Absolutely. So I wrote that book. And the conceit with the Sentry and the Hulk is awesome. He shows up, the Sentry shows up and the Hulk's there. And the Hulk sees him like a little puppy. And he goes, oh my God, Golden Man, I've been waiting for you. And it turns out that the Hulk has always been angry because his skin hurts. And no one ever asked him. No one ever knew that his skin hurt. And when the Sentry shows up, it soothes and calms his skin. So he becomes like this little loyal puppy dog, right? And it was really sweet and really sad. And so when they come to this final showdown with the Void, which is the opposite, the Void is everything the Sentry's not. So now, and you've never seen the Hulk afraid. And as the Void, comes in from the sea, the Hulk kind of looks at Sentry and is like, I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to be the bravest one there is. And you're like, oh my God, this poor guy. Like he's doing everything he can. He's like breaking your heart. He's like, I'm going to be brave, even though he's terrified. And I'm like,
no, you finish, please, Paul.
I missed that, right? Like that story with consequence. And I want to see the Hulk do those things. So I think that when we break this because we're like, let's put out product, or let's go do this all the time, or let's say a thing. I think we've ascertained I don't do politics, right? So I might say things that are not politically correct at times. It is so far past the time when we stop like yelling about identity politics. Who cares if there's a mixed race couple? Who cares if there's this? Who cares if that trans? Who cares, man? Chill out. However, if I see one more ad with a mixed race couple, I'm going to punch the television. Stop it.
That came up in our Christmas meal conversations. It's like, does every couple in these commercials needs to be a mixed couple? And again, it is like it does kind of stretch credulity. If you know.
What it's doing is it is divisive in some ways, because it's like, this is how poorly you did it before. You couldn't do mixed race couples before, so you figure the antidote is to make everyone a mixed race couple. It shows how bad you are at telling stories. Why didn't you just tell stories about gay people and mixed race couple and transgender people and regular like heterosexual couples who've been married and older people? Why didn't you do that the whole way down the line? This is why you're in the problem that you're in right now. So you're trying to compensate, and everybody's a mixed race couple. I've got to be honest with you. I'm starting not to believe the Geico ad. Chill, stop it, right?
I'm with you, dude. That's awesome. Jesus. Well, let's wrap, because seriously, Paul, as always, and listen, I wanted to give you your time to explain what's going on with you and the ridiculous, annoying things and truly the things that are hurting you. There's a GoFundMe account to help Paul out with his legal troubles. I wish I had the URL to put under the screen right now, but if you look up Paul Jenkins and GoFundMe, or you go to Paul's on Facebook, and certainly there are links there, I'm assuming, under your account, correct?
Yeah, if you go to Facebook, I think the thing that everybody will probably need to see, like I say this all the time, so when you have run into someone who is just literally the epitome of a dangerous and toxic fan, who has cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars and does it because they can and because of their own mental health issues, right? When you run into that, you can't legislate for it. It happens to you. Like it's just happening to me. And yet I realized I had to kind of stand up to it, because if I don't, who will? Now, I've done this in my career, John, and it's not been fun. We did it through Tundra. We created a company that existed for the benefit of creators. And I will never forget sitting in the snake pit on Beverly Boulevard with Kevin Eastman when he had tears in his eyes and said, I did this for the benefit of creators, and I'm so sad that some of them did not deserve it. How sad, right? I've been there through the Creators Bill of Rights. I've been there when I felt, and I still believe this, I know it wasn't a popular take at the time with the big two, but I felt that the two bigger companies were playing creators against each other, and certainly playing I didn't think it was fair that creators can be told, if you go work for that company, you're not going to work for us again. And we're freelancers. You want to give us health insurance and all those things. And so because at that point I was an elder statesman, now I'm an even elder statesman, I went like, no, that's not right. And I made the one mistake that you should never make. Instead of yelling on a Twitter diatribe, I was eloquent about it and said the things that I think needed to be said. We need to look at ourselves and protect the most valuable part of this industry, which is the creators, right? And it really caused waves and it really upset people. So I'm in this battle now. I think it's an existential battle for this medium and for the things that we love. If people can come from outside of this and ruin people's lives, threaten multiple lawsuits, attack them, disparage them, hurt their families, if narcissistic or sadistic people come into this and do awful and horrible things, there are two sayings in a sense that we need to look at. One of them I said, which is the only thing necessary for the advancement of evil is for good men to stand by and do nothing. But there's another anecdote that I think we should also listen to, right? When they came for the teachers, I did nothing. When they came for the librarians, I did nothing, et cetera, et cetera. And when they came for me, there was no one there left to save me. And we need to remember that, okay? Like, you think it's not going to happen to you? Well, don't exhale. And that's what I kind of saying to some of my creator friends as well. Don't exhale, because if we don't collectively come together and stop this from happening and show people that this cannot happen to us, then don't complain in a year's time if when it's happening to you and you're looking to do a GoFundMe. It's time to put an end to this behavior. And I mean that with everybody from every walk of life, every political spectrum. You do not want the things that you love to be destroyed by people that only care about hurting you and making money. So let's collectively put a stop to it.
Amen. Absolutely, dude. Thanks as always. I hope this helps your cause and our cause. Really, yes. All of us.
It's our cause. I agree.
It is our cause. Absolutely, man. Well, like I said, when I say with Rob, I'm like, all right, well, let me put the bat signal up and get Paul back on Word Balloon, and we'll talk more about this.
Can I give you one teaser? Because I don't do this with you, John. Normally you ask me what am I got going on.
Yeah.
This story is fascinating. This story is unbelievable. This story. It is not just an awful thing that's happening to me and my family. It's also a fascinating story, right? So it's got some wrinkles to it. And one of the wrinkles, as you and I discussed at the beginning of this interview, was what happened to your donation, right? What was it that happened to your $35 and everybody's $35? Well, I've got bank accounts that I've managed to uncover in the commission of our documentary that show that that money may not have been used the way that you intended, right? Okay, that's interesting. So I went on with Rob. And the first thing that happened after we went on is that a bunch of false DMCA takedowns hit everything. And this person tried to scrub the internet from any evidence that we had basically brought these bank accounts out, right? That's no good. And but he's always able to escape. Well, on Tuesday this week, here's my pitch. On Tuesday this week, Rob and I are going to get back on, and we are going to show some revelations about this situation that you will not believe. Because
wow.
You know what? I've had it, right? Yes, in my little part of the world, I've become an investigative reporter. And guess what? I'm halfway decent at it, mate. So we're going to show some things that no one's ever seen about this Axonar project. And when people see it and they're backers, I would imagine they're going to be pretty furious, and they should be. Tune in on Tuesday.
Well, there you go. All right, next Tuesday, everybody, go to Robert Meyer Burnett's Burnett Work. I believe that's the name of his channel on YouTube. And I guess this coming Tuesday, Paul and Rob will talk further. Well, as I said, Paul, Robert, and Chris Gossett have been victims to this incident. And it bums me out because I know first of all, they're all great creative guys, but they've also become friends of mine. And it does disappoint me and angers me. So if I'm able to help by providing Paul and Rob, and if Chris ever wants to talk about it, that's their prerogatives. But yeah, I'm happy to do that because again, it's a wrong that needs to stop.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Thank you, man. As always, I do want everyone to know that as well, and it's already in progress. It's one of the reasons why my head was down at various times during the discussion. The Oh Yeah podcast with Art Baltazar and Franco is up and running. I will be joining them momentarily. I told them I'll be talking to Paul first, and but then I will be joining them for our discussion. We're going to do a year-end show, a little bit lighter fare than some of the things that Paul and I discussed. But we got into good Sally Floyd stuff, which really made me happy.
We did.
So, and some good Paul Jenkins greatest hits moments as far as some of his other stories as well. So if you check on Word Balloon, I am simulcasting. They've already begun, so you can start watching them now. But I will be joining them momentarily after a brief bathroom break on my part. So so until then, everybody, I'm trying to find my clothes. There it is. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy. Hang on, Paul.